Welcome to this session. This should be a very interesting discussion, and thank you, first of all, to all the panelists who have joined us today. Today is about scaling green technologies. The world energy demand is going to increase by around 50%. To put that in perspective, that's 170 from the current 170 petawatt hours to 250 petawatt hours by 2050. And we have to do this in a sustainable fashion. We have to do this in a way that meets our own governments, but also the global imperatives when it comes to sustainability. It presents an interesting challenge. The second thing that is quite important is that the race is on. Green technology, hydrogen, SAF, all of the things that are technology-based that will tackle the hard-to-abate sectors that we have. Members of this panel are very involved from A to Z in that. These technology-based solutions are even more relevant in this part of the world. In the MENA region, in the GCC, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, technology-based solutions are the pathway to decarbonization. It's much more important for us here to pioneer this path for the rest of the world to follow. And some of us has actually pioneered this path as we speak. For example, the NEOM Air Products and ACWA Power, $8.5 billion, correct me if I'm wrong, investment in green technology and green hydrogen on the west coast of Saudi Arabia is the first of its kind. There are challenges in scaling technologies. Yes, there are some like solar that are on the side of the spectrum where we have managed to bring down the cost. And in fact, I believe Saudi Arabia has, and the region has, a fifth of the global cost when it comes to renewable powers. Not only that, there are ambitions to bring down the cost of green hydrogen to $1.50 by 2030 as well in the region. We are of the strong belief that the Middle East and Saudi Arabia are not going to be contributors to the energy transitions. However, the next 6 to 8 years will continue its position as the energy basket to the world. And it's these players who are going to be doing it. And it's these players who are setting up the policies and regulations to be doing it. The challenges are many. Challenges from operators, challenges from export markets, challenges from financial institutions, and the funding. $4.6 trillion requirement of funding in order to achieve the global ambitions. Challenges from the industrial consumers as well. So there is a path, and the path is clear. However, we have to be pragmatic. We have to have a vision, and we have to be pragmatic in the path to get there. What we call visionary pragmatism. So let me start by introducing the panel. If you don't mind, gentlemen, 1 minute about who you are and how you feel about scaling green technology. Maybe I'll start with you, Raad.
So thank you, Akram. My name is Raad Saady. I'm the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of ACWA Power. ACWA Power is an energy transition champion from Saudi Arabia, but we're in 14 countries, alhamdulillah. And we work with our regulators here and regulators everywhere to try to bring down reliable, safe, and green technologies to the world.
Hi everyone, this is Mazen Al-Bahkali. I'm the CEO of the Saudi Power Procurement Company. Very happy to be here with you today. At the Saudi Power Procurement Company, or in short we call the principal buyer, we are the power off-taker of power in Saudi Arabia. We are responsible for tendering all the projects in renewable and conventional power. So we deal with the developers, and then we resell the aggregated power to the distribution companies, SEC, and others.
Dr. Zeid?
So good afternoon. My name is Zeid Ghareeb. I'm the General Director for the Circular Carbon Economy National Program at the Ministry of Energy. What I do and I focus on is how to enable the kingdom to reach its net zero by 2060, which is through the circular carbon economy approach or framework. Within the framework, we focus on, or we have multiple programs, renewable energy program, energy efficiency program, and I lead two important programs, which is the Clean Hydrogen Program, as well as the CCUS program. Thank you.
Bruno?
I'm Bruno Bensasson. I am Executive Director for Renewable for EDF. Renewable is mainly hydroelectricity, wind and solar for ourselves. EDF is a global power company with its roots in France and working on production, transport, distribution and services for power and energy, and very active now for 10 years in the region, especially in Saudi Arabia here, but also in the nearby Emirates and Oman.
Fantastic. Last but not least, Daniel.
My name is Daniel Hanna. First of all, let me say a very big thank you for the invitation to this expert panel. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've been involved in the region for over 20 years. I put the first sustainable finance team based in the Middle East, was involved in some of the first transactions, like the first transition bond for Etihad Airlines. I had the privilege of working with PIF on its inaugural green issuance and setting its sustainable finance framework. And I was involved in the financing for the NEOM project that Akram mentioned. In my current role, I run sustainable finance at Barclays Bank. We have committed $1 trillion to mobilize sustainable and transition finance by 2030, and we're investing £500 million into climate technologies directly so that we can take our understanding and accelerate the deployment of the technologies, Akram, that you so eloquently put out at the beginning.
Thank you very much. This should be a very interesting discussion. Should we get into it?
Yalla.
All right, fantastic. So question number one, and maybe I'll come to some of the private players in this. I mean, CCUS, not easy. Green hydrogen, not easy. It is an opportunity, though. It's a fantastic opportunity that comes with its risks. So maybe first question for you, as the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of ACWA, how do you see the opportunity? How do you leverage the positioning of your company in that opportunity, and how do you go after it?
I think the excitement is palpable. If you talk to anyone in the energy space in the region here, you can see the excitement. Saudi Arabia has been a reliable energy partner to the world for about 100 years. That same muscle is there. As we transition energy, we will still have those same muscles on how do we do it, how do we stay reliable, how do we stay safe, how do we continue to be a reliable energy partner to the world. And if I tell you the secret is not what most people talk about, it's not the resources, it's not the technology, believe it or not, it's not the land, it's not what people talk about. It's the partnership between the public sector and the private sector. This ultimately is the secret. And if I can tell you why, what developers, private developers do is they talk to regulators and off-takers about the inherent risks that you just discussed. What we do is we discuss those risks and de-risk those projects as much as possible, and then do the project. When people ask us how come the cheapest projects in the world are in Saudi Arabia, it's because we have a partnership and we have open and honest conversations about where the risks are. We work hand in hand to reduce these risks. Then we pass on these savings. If those risks are not mitigated, the tariff will be up here because you price against a risk. So I think if anyone looks at the Saudi model and why it's successful, I think it's this partnership. And last statement I want to make, when we go abroad and when they ask us about what can we do to replicate the model in Saudi, we actually talk to Mazen and talk to our friends, and we say, do you mind if we take the latest RFP to show these folks in different places just so we can help them? And the answer is always yes. And we show them, look, this is what you do. And this is how you become competitive. So really, the way to mitigate it is to have a conversation and have a communication with your off-takers and your regulators.
Fantastic. And maybe just a follow-up, because Mazen, you actually sit in the middle of that public-private sphere, right? And you've got another challenge on your hand, because this kingdom and this country wants to double, and correct me if I'm wrong, but double its capacity in the next 6 to 8 years. Power available capacity.
That's correct.
It's not going to be an easy task. How are you thinking about the framing of it as a challenge, as an opportunity in the role that you play as the Saudi power purchasing company?
Okay, thanks. First of all, let me say that the way and the perspective that my colleague just brought in terms of how communication is important. We absolutely feel it. Yeah. And for us, it's the problem is kind of bigger because yes, we are dealing with our developers that are going to cater for our needs since we have a major mandate in terms of accelerating, putting the renewables and the power on the ground. But then we have supply chain, we have contractors as well that are in need for information ahead of time to know what are the investments that are going to be deployed and how can they be positioned and what are the de-risk measures that we're going to put together into the way we're contracting with our developers and eventually them with their supply chains and EPCs in order to do it. What we bring to the table is that we are a neutral partner that is open for dialogue. Our mandate is very clear. We need to focus on security of supply, which means catering of putting the right megawatts to cater for the demand needed in the kingdom. And the second mandate is making sure that we do it at, keeping an eye, the cost of serve to our consumers is basically remaining competitive. So we do the balance in terms of how much we de-risk it and putting the competition. Our pledge to our partners is that we're open and transparent in the way we tender the projects. So far, if we look at the mandate that we had, since we launched the program, by the end of 2022, we've tendered around 14.5 gigawatts of renewable projects. By the end of this year, this number is going to grow to about 22 gigawatts. Next year alone, we're going to tender 20 gigawatts of projects under the renewable space, let alone the conventional space. So we are accelerating to be able to deliver that. The Ministry of Energy kind of leads the way in terms of putting overall the long-term strategy, while the way we do it is that we plan the execution of that plan, and then we work with our developers in order to do it. And if we were able to do that, the entire, since the beginning of the program until 2021, that entire volume was tendered alone in 2022. So I think we are able, with the dialogue, with aligning the stakeholders, both from a regulatory framework, policymaker framework, being in the middle, but then to the commercial market, to the developers, to the financing community as well, in addition to the supply chain of what our volumes are. I think we've proven so far a good track record, and we aspire, hopefully, to be able to deliver.
I just want to add one point. I want to put my Mazen hat on. Another thing that they do very well is they have a local content criteria and local manpower criteria localization as well, but they don't dump that on the developer and say this is what you need to do. We actually have conversations. How can we increase the local content in a sustainable way? How can we increase hiring of Saudis in these workplaces? How can we do training? So I want to give them a bit more credit than we do when we fight usually during meetings, but they actually do a great job of having these open conversations. So just want to say that.
Thank you. And I think, if you just so I may add, this is a very important point, and thank you for bringing it up. I think we have the mandate, but also the responsibility, given all the volume that is planned for tendering all these renewable projects. I think we have the mandate to put it in our requirement, but then as a business person, and we've been on the business we come from the sector as well, there is enough business case for manufacturers, given the volume that is planned, both for the local energy mix, but then also for the renewable energy exports and the renewable energy for the purpose of producing hydrogen. There will be enough volume to justify an investment for any manufacturer to localize their investments in the kingdom.
Yeah, and actually that was going to be the next point that I'd like to take this conversation towards, and maybe we can start with you, Dr. Zeid, and then Bruno, to hear some of your thoughts about this as well. Technology means many things, right? And we've got some very mature ones, such as solar, and hopefully, inshallah, very soon, green hydrogen. But there's also a spectrum of tech that plays out. That's one kind of pillar. The other pillar is the role of the ministry is to manage and incentivize the sector to move towards all of these low maturity tech and deploy in the high maturity tech. But also there's an export market. We talk about the energy basket of the world. How do you balance and juggle these kind of topics in your role, Dr. Zeid?
As you know, the kingdom aims to be one of the major exporters of both renewable electricity and hydrogen, both. And for us at the ministry, we don't call ourselves regulator. We call ourselves enabling regulators. You mentioned incentives, but it's not about the incentives. It's an enablement package. Incentives by itself could be a short-sighted solution, but at the ministry, we enable our ecosystem, the private sector. From the ministry point of view, and I see many familiar faces here, many actually have visited the ministry, sat with the ministry, with the regulator, discuss business opportunities. That's why we don't have this barrier between the regulator and the private sector. We're all work together. As a matter of fact, we joke with some of them that we should cut the travel time and they should have their offices within the ministry, because we have almost daily meetings. And Raad knows about this. Raad is one of those who was actually...
Raad has an office at the ministry.
Almost has an office there. So that's why this is how we enable our private sector, the ecosystem in the kingdom. So we have worked with all governments, and I think no one is as active as the kingdom when it comes to clean energy, both renewable and hydrogen. We have signed multiple memorandum of understandings and agreements with the demand centers, with Japan, with Korea, with Germany, with Netherlands, with the EU as well. And also we have agreed with governments on initiatives where the private sector will play a key role. Just to mention two that was recently signed is a lighthouse initiative with Japan. And under that lighthouse initiative, we have multiple lighthouse projects, a project between the kingdom and Japan in order to really walk the talk and enable the transition. Another one that was signed just 2 days ago was the hydrogen oasis with the Republic of Korea. So this shows you that as a policy maker, we do actually have the private sector in mind. The private sector is with us. We actually discuss our policies and how they impact the private sector, and we listen to private sector carefully, because the private sector is the true engine in this transition.
Yeah, and I think, private sector but global player. I'm looking at EDF over there. How do you view this? How do you view the opportunity here? I'd love to hear this perspectives that you have on this region, specifically when it comes to your firm, and maybe your personal thoughts about it as well.
Yes, thank you for the question. How do we see carbon capture and hydrogen? First, we see them as necessary, absolutely necessary, not easy, but possible. They are absolutely necessary if we want to fight against climate change faster than we have done so far, while keeping a good economic growth and social prosperity. Carbon capture is necessary to keep fossil as a good part of the energy mix, but fossil with carbon capture. Hydrogen and longer molecules are also necessary on the customer side to satisfy energy usages that cannot be totally satisfied only with power. So both are necessary. Yes, they are not easy as any new technology, but they are possible. To which conditions? I would say two conditions. Technological innovation on one side and good regulations, incentives on the other side. When I look to the innovation side, I'm confident, because there is a lot of research, a lot of work on that, a lot of human resources, including in this very country. And when you look to wind and solar, where they were 20 years ago, nowhere. And today they are the cheapest solution. So yes, there is a way. As for regulation, those solutions, they come with a cost. It's not for free. Fighting against climate change won't come for free, won't come at the exact same cost. So if we want to make it acceptable, affordable, we need to give a kind of incentives. And that's where the regulation in different forms come. You said, I believe, $1.5 per kilogram of H2.
Yep.
If that was the case, that would mean that a price for the CO2 of $50 per ton of CO2 would be enough. And I suspect that it could be the same for carbon capture. So one way or another, it can be taxed, it can be subsidized, it can be some public values. We need to give a value to carbon so that when you organize a tender, carbon capture comes. That when you organize a tender, green hydrogen or blue hydrogen comes. And when I look to the globe, I think that there are few places that are as good position as Saudi Arabia to do it. Because you have all the geology, all the energy, all the financial and human capabilities. So there are not a lot, and Saudi Arabia is one of them. For EDF, we work in Saudi Arabia. We have plenty of projects, and we do that in partnerships with local partners, such as NESMA, that some of you must know, and also with foreign partnerships. And you've just mentioned some off-takers from Eastern Asia, such as Japan or South Korea, and of course, we work with those partners.
And maintaining this positioning that this region has, including Saudi Arabia, to continue its position
That's right.
as the global energy basket of the world, the supplier of demand, if you may. Let's switch over to the dollar signs. Let's switch over to the money. 4.6 trillion is what's required. Daniel, how do you go about this and managing your play in this as one of the leaders in the global banks that fund these type of operations?
So actually the numbers may even be higher than you say, Akram. It could be 6 trillion in terms of the additional spend that is going to be required to power the transition towards net zero. And I actually think there's a question you didn't ask, which is actually even tougher, which we've seen this growth in renewables that Bruno just laid out happen at a time of ultra-low interest rates. I think the question you could have asked me is the transition affordable at 5% rates? Because there's definitely been a significant shift over the last 12 to 18 months. I mean, if you look at valuations, and we can sort of talk about in the public market, for example, Ørsted, huge successful story in terms of the commitment towards wind. Its share price is now down 70% from its peak. In the private markets, you've seen valuations equally hit, and we're very active in raising capital for a lot of the technologies that are coming through, hydrogen, carbon capture. It is taking longer and longer, even for good companies, to raise money. And that's before we even start talking about the lingering impact of COVID on supply chains, the inflationary shock that's come through, that's really made it more expensive in some cases to deploy a place, again, maybe in offshore wind. So I think it is a more challenging environment to have this conversation than it was, say, 24 months ago. That all said, I think it's really important to put this in the broader context. Renewable capacity is going to be at another record high this year. We're probably going to see, 107 gigawatts installed. Last year, it was a record. Even in the most emerging spaces, we've talked a lot about hydrogen here, momentum really actually continues to accelerate. Electrolyzer shipments doubled in the last 9 months to September. In terms of announced projects, that's tripled this year in terms of what we've seen, 174 metric tons kind of announced. So, and overall, we're now seeing a tipping point in terms of the amount of clean investment going into the clean energy transition than fossil fuels for the first time last year. So I think we've definitely got a more challenging shock to the system, but the momentum and the forward direction, I think, is very clear. We remain very focused in terms of how we can support that. In the first half of this year, we facilitated $36 billion of sustainable finance. And I think the key thing is we're trying to focus on creating a sort of climate tech escalator, taking new ideas from ideation to IPO and sort of connecting the dots. We've got a venture builder that's put through 260 companies, many that have a regional nexus. If you take 44.01, which is using mineralization to capture carbon in Oman, or Dendro, which is using drones to plant trees. And then I mentioned that we're investing directly £500 million off our own balance sheet into these technologies. And I recently brought 2 companies to the region to really leverage the strengths in the region here as well. And we are also seeing successful IPOs. We were involved in the largest renewables IPO, Next Tracker, at the beginning of this year, raised 734 million. It was oversubscribed as well. So I think the momentum is there. It is more challenging, I think, to your first question. And I think, and maybe we'll come on to this, but to pick up on some of the points that the other panelists have said, public-private partnerships, as Raad said, is absolutely key here. I think the enabling environment is really critical. And we're going to find new ways to have to really scale this. Because one of the big challenges is this industrial revolution, unlike the technological one we've been through, this is about hardware, not software. And that requires a lot more capital.
Yeah, and you've taken us to that. So we've talked about 2 parts of the trifecta that need to come together. The third part is the actual tech. And as we were talking about earlier, it's a spectrum, right? So you've got solar and wind on the renewable side, on the mature side with the cost curve, seeing the experience curve and bringing all the costs down. You've got green and let's not talk about blue, but green coming through the pipe now with some serious capital being deployed against it. Where do you see more, and what do you see the tail of that technology spend going? And anybody can jump in here. What do you think's next?
So, for my experience, I agree. There is the technologies on the face of it look simple. If you look at solar or wind, it's very easy to look at it. But if you dig a bit deeper, so for example, we go to some countries and we put a lot of renewable into the system, you find that the grid is not 100% ready to take a lot of renewable. There's a lot of technology, ultimately, that needs to be put, which Saudi Arabia has done a great job of, so you can take on all that renewable energy. Another example is when we talk about different technologies, integration becomes an issue. Each one on its own makes sense. Each one on its own can survive very well. You bring them all together like we do in some of our projects. We have, if you look at our project, Red Sea, you have so many different technologies in one space. You have solar, storage, largest storage in the world actually, desalination, waste to energy, district cooling, so many different technologies in one. What becomes the challenge is the integration, because these are different OEMs, usually different technology hubs, technology bases. So that's part of the job of the developer, is to continue those conversations so that we're bringing all of this together. Otherwise, it becomes a commodity, that technology, if you just take it off the shelf.
Right.
But I think our main job is to work with regulators and off-takers to talk about the grid as an example, because we have some experience, they have more experience, and then about how to integrate that. So I think technology, capital T technology, there's a lot to be discussed. But on the surface, I agree, it looks pretty primitive, but really isn't.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that point on the grid piece, and how we design our plan once we know what's the ultimate demand is and how we get to it. It's as you mentioned, it's a combination basically of trying to put all the technologies available together and thinking of the technologies of the future of how we do it. With the ambitious plan of trying to reach 50% of the grid by 2030 coming from renewable, this puts a huge stress on the grid, basically, to be able to cater for the fluctuation of the renewable energy in the grid, which in terms have us think about what are the solutions. Okay, are we moving along from, is it only going to be renewable energy? But then no, in order to cater to that problem, you need to start thinking about storage. Storage is batteries. With that, batteries could be one solution, but then hydro is another solution that we want to consider. So this is another technology that you want to go and think. And then we analyze using basically data analytics and AI to be able to plan hour by hour for the next 3 years. How do you expect the demand is going to grow, and which power plant is going to be dispatched and needed? Based on that, we do study 2 things. How is that impacting the dispatch and the cost to serve, but also the system stability is an issue. And one of the things that are very important for us is that while renewable is the way and decarbonization is the way that we're going after, we have to realize that there has to be a certain amount of grid base load in the system. Okay. To be able to cater for the base load demand, stabilize the system, and why? So we are decarbonizing by introducing renewable energy for sure. But then what are we doing from another technology standpoint to be able to keep the grid stable with the base load supply? So for that perspective, you got the liquid that is being used today in the system is being displaced.
That's right.
So this is one, so getting rid of all the liquid in the system. The second is replacing it by combined cycle natural gas, clean, okay, by itself. But then the third, as we introduce, and you'll hear hopefully soon, a couple of projects that we're working on, there will be a carbon capture for our combined cycle, high efficiency gas power plants that we're putting on the ground. So the combination of all these solutions together, so we're using every technology out there today to be able to decarbonize, but yet keep the system stable to cater for the load and cater for the cost to serve.
Yep. Bruno, I think you reacted when the word hydro came up.
Yeah,
so you want to tell us about hydro?
Your question on possible new steps, I think there are some on the production side and some on the customer side.
Yep.
As for production, of course, this country has already a wonderful energy production. To come, yes, I would mention hydroelectricity. Believe it or not, but not very far in Dubai, we are accompanying the customer, DIWA, in a new pump storage power station, which is a very powerful hydroelectricity tool that we have already somewhere else in the world, especially in France, and that we could develop here. And we are already discussing with NEOM to have some very powerful hydroelectricity storage. That's one element for hydroelectricity. Of course, people would think, and EDF will advocate for nuclear. It can come with the size of large nuclear reactor or smaller modular reactor, both are possible, and carbon capture to accompany the fossil in the fight against climate change. That's for the production. On the customer side, we have already discussed about H2 or longer molecules, green or blue, that will be necessary, absolutely necessary for heavy industry and heavy transportation. Let me also allude to electrical vehicles for lighter transport, which will be important and still to come. And last, not least, energy efficiency, which is an important element. Energy sovereignty, energy efficiency, which is part of the road to a good fight against climate change.
Yep.
Can I mean, just to maybe two points quickly. First, to agree with this conversation, I think grids, storage, that is definitely the next big area of focus. And I think the amount of investment that's going to be required for grids is hard to underestimate. I think agreeing with all the points that Raad, Mazen, and Bruno have just said, I would add one more. We're going to have to get used to a much less linear system. It's going to become much more disassociated, particularly as we move into EVs, which themselves become sort of mobile batteries moving around. So I think we're all going to have to get used to a much more complex management system. AI becomes really important, as Mazen said. The second point, though, I would note is, if you like, that's what we need to do around power. And we've got a bit of a playbook there. It's not fully done, but we've got the playbook. The second one is around the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate sectors. So how do we start thinking about decarbonization of steel, shipping, aviation? And this is where the technology comes back, Akram, to your first question, which is, how do we scale these technologies? Yep. And the big issue here is this is going to require a lot of capital. And these companies are sort of facing, in early startups, you'd normally talk about the valley of death, where you've launched your first product, and effectively your costs are there, but the cash flows aren't coming back to justify it, and they've got to bridge this valley of death. Well, one entrepreneur that we were at an event in New York talking about this, he talks about, actually, with climate tech, it's the dunes of doom. Because once you launch the first product, you've then got to get your next pilot out, then you've got to do it 10 times more, and the capital goes from 1 million to 10 million to 100 million to very quickly lots more. So unlike scaling, let's say, Facebook, scaling climate tech, much more capital intensive. And we haven't really got a financial system that's ready for that. So we're going to need someone that has a good credit rating, lots of available land, capabilities, understands the energy transition. And that's where I think the region can play a really powerful role in catalyzing people and really getting through to the next wave of climate technology that's going to be required at scale to decarbonize these other areas.
If I may add just one point, just to capitalize on this interesting discussion, I believe the key is also to have accelerated deployment. And in order for us to have accelerated deployment, you need to create a good business case. And I'll share with you two examples of two technologies and approaches that would not see the light, except that if you put the right business case and you bring multiple stakeholders to work on it to make it more profitable. So the first example, we talk about CCS. But the CCS, as you know, is costly. And you need to really prioritize the industries that will benefit from the CCS. One of the most expensive industries where you apply carbon capture is the power sector. That's why in our strategy, power sector will be at the latest stage within the CCS program. But for us to ensure that we lower the cost of the carbon capture for power, we need to start from now. And one of the things that we did, we partner with KAUST, King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. They have a very good technology called cryogenic carbon capture, where you freeze this CO2, that increases its concentration and lower the cost. However, they wouldn't be able to deploy the technology because they need partners. A partner where a plant where they need to deploy the technology, and also you need to make that sustainable. You need to have a customer, because again, CCS is a cost, it's not a profitable center.
Right.
So we actually brought one of the companies that needs that CO2 for other applications, and that application is building concrete made of CO2. So CO2 is used as a feedstock to build the concrete. So we brought the technology provider, KAUST. We brought the beneficiary, which is SEC, the Saudi electric company, and also the off-taker, which is NEOM, to off-take that CO2. So that's a business case that wouldn't actually happen unless you bring all the parties collaborating together. The other technology or approach that no one is talking about is CCU, carbon capture and utilization, because CO2 is a feedstock to many industries and applications. Think about this water. This is not carbonated water, but if you have a carbonated water made of CO2, it will be more expensive than the normal water. So there is already a business case using that CO2 to create value. However, bringing the CO2 is also an expensive endeavor. That's why we are now assessing and studying a hub for utilization, where industries that need CO2 will come in together. We create that hub. And we are now doing multiple feasibility studies on different products. Food and beverage is one. Green methanol is another. SAF is the third. And other products that will utilize the CO2. But one single company doing that will not work. You need to bring everybody together. We need to provide a business case that actually worth looking after and worth actually pursuing.
Yeah, I think, if I may, and this is what I've learned, right? If I'm looking at the screen, how to scale the green technologies from spark to flame, I think what we're all saying, and what we're all saying is that it's an ecosystem play that involves the financiers, involves the regulations and the policies, involves the private sector plays in order to bring things together. And we have now, not by design, but somehow we've created this trifecta of what needs to work together, and we've answered the question that has been posed to us in this panel. We've got 5 minutes left, and I'd like to actually leave the floor to you to talk about what you're doing in your own institutions and where are the challenges that you see that are coming and how you're positioning yourselves to overcome them. Maybe Raad, I'll start with you.
I'll start talking about energy and its role in desalination. I know it's outside the scope of what we're discussing today, but water is a real issue, and I think a real issue globally that's not talked about enough.
Yep.
We talk a lot about energy transition, which is a very worthy discussion, and it's my job to talk about it. But if you ask me, one conversation that we need to all be having is, what are we doing with water? Because temperature change or climate change has an impact on energy, which we all know, but it has a massive impact on water as well. And energy used to be a big chunk of creating water. Now, a lot through reverse osmosis and using green technology, we as companies like ACWA, and we're the largest private desalinator in the world, we've taken out 80% of the energy consumption at desalination plants, and we'll continue to press that down. I think energy will play an important role beyond energy into what we can do with water. So I think that's a conversation we need to continue to have, because water really is life, and I think we don't discuss it enough.
Yeah. So thanks, and I think I want to build on that water, but then other
Yes.
industries too. As Saudi Arabia is blessed with huge amount of energy resources. Other than fuel, we have big lands with availability of energy from sun and also wind and others, right? So as we continue to decarbonize, as we continue to build renewable energy in the sector, we will be able to provide green power to any industry that basically goes electrified.
That's right.
Whether it being water desalination or other industries that would electrify more and more. There will be greener and more green power in the system as we go further in the next years, which will accelerate the decarbonization of the country and the industry altogether.
So I think one thing that is not a challenge, but it should be on our top to-do list, which is uniforming the standards for all these new energies that are coming.
That's right.
Excellent point.
We have spent a lot of efforts putting standards on everything in this room, on the lights, on the carpet, on the wood, everything, even the screen. So we need to really make a uniform standards and certification for these new energies.
Yeah.
Because it will be very costly to have dedicated projects for each country, because each country will have its own certification,
Right.
and you lose the scalability. You'll never succeed in scaling the production. That's why we need to get into this endeavor, bring everybody on the table, and have this uniform standards and certification. But we need to be very careful and mindful that the certification should actually not focus on the source itself, because we'll have a big argument if we get into the source, but the standard certification should focus on what we worry about the most, the culprit in this case, which is emission.
Emissions.
right.
Yep.
We need to have standard certification that puts emission, which under the Paris Agreement, as the focus point or the focus of the standards. And I think that's very important for us if we want to scale and actually if we want to lower the cost.
Thank you, Dr. Zeid.
Exactly.
Bruno, how do you think about this?
I'm feeling very enthusiastic because it's a very motivating challenge, and definitely we need to go faster. We have done some stuff in the last 30 years, but the next 30 years we need to go faster, and this country is very committed to it. For that, I believe we need four resources. First is human resources, to innovate and to build. But when I look around me, I see many people ready to join the adventure. Secondly, we need financial resources. I wouldn't say it's the most difficult, because if competition allows to get decent returns that are adapted to the risk, finance should follow. Thirdly, we need natural resources. Do we have enough copper, cobalt, nickel, lithium for this transition? That's a question mark, but when you look to the mining industry, backward, since 1900, the copper production per year has been multiplied by 40. So can we multiply it still by 4? That's a question mark, but to be answered by the mining industry, I will be optimistic on that one. And the last thing is about the social or political capital. That has a cost, a little cost, one that we need to make as affordable as possible, but there is a need of political will, of political courage to explain that, yes, this cost is worth the effort, not for ourselves, but for the next generation.
Fantastic. Thank you. Daniel.
So 2 quick points, fantastic summary by my panelists. 2 quick points. First, I think we haven't mentioned climate resilience. There is a 99% chance that this will be yet another record high in temperatures globally this year. And we need to invest more in making the world more climate resilient. So that's attracting less than 9% of climate finance at the moment. Technologies that can scale and adapt to that, I think, are really key. The second thing, though, is just to echo the enthusiasm for this panel. I come out of this incredibly optimistic. And I think back a century ago, the Gulf was hit by a worldwide depression. Its pearl industry faced wipeout from the Japanese who'd managed to crack industrialization of pearls. And the first oil well was discovered not that far away from here, ushering in a new hydrocarbon-backed century. This region can reinvent and really scale the next level of industrial revolution as we move towards net zero. It has all the resources, as we've heard, and I think that leaves me feeling incredibly enthusiastic about the opportunity coming away from this panel.
Fantastic. With that, I hope we've answered the question on how to scale green technologies, and I hope we've left you all with a number of insights that you can walk away from this panel from. I'd like to thank each and every single one of you for taking the time out and talking to us today, and we appreciate you being here and listening to us. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Shukran, Akram. Great job.